The color of the signal.
The signal arrived on a Wednesday, which seemed wrong for something of that magnitude. Wednesdays were for project meetings and reheated coffee, and the particular low-grade despair of a week that was not quite half over. They were not for the end of human certainty. And yet, Yusuf Adebayo heard it first, not because he was special. He would have been the first to say this, and the last to believe it. He heard it first because he happened to be at the Millhaven Radio Observatory at 3:14 a.m. on a Wednesday in November, monitoring a frequency range that most of his colleagues considered a waste of array time, pursuing a hypothesis about interstellar hydrogen clouds that he had begun to suspect was wrong. He was preparing to write a note to himself about abandoning the hypothesis when the signal came in. He did not recognize it as a signal at first. What he saw on the spectrogram was a pattern in a frequency range that should have contained nothing but thermal noise. The pattern was not complex, a series of pulses, regular but not mechanical, with an interval structure that his brain kept trying to parse as rhythm. Like something tapping, like something patient. He checked the equipment. The equipment was fine. He checked for local interference. There was none. He ran the data through 3 different analysis pipelines and got the same result each time. Something was producing organized pulses in a frequency range that propagated at roughly the speed of light from a direction that his initial triangulation placed somewhere in the region of the constellation Sculptor. He sat very still for a long time. Then he called his colleague, Dr. Farouk, who was asleep, who answered the phone with the voice of someone who had been asleep for exactly the right amount of time to be deeply annoyed at being woken. "You need to come in," Yusuf said. Farouk came in. He looked at the data. He checked the equipment. He checked for interference. He ran his own analysis pipeline and got the same result. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. "It could be natural," Farouk said finally. "Yes," Yusuf agreed. "Pulsars produce regular signals." "Not at this frequency, not with this interval structure." Another silence. "We should tell someone," Farouk said. They told someone. This was the beginning of the part that Yusuf would later describe, in the interviews he gave sparingly and the papers he never quite finished, as the bureaucratization of the impossible. What had been, at 3:14 a.m., a moment of pure and vertiginous wonder, the feeling of standing at an edge and looking down into something without a bottom, became, over the following 72 hours, a series of phone calls, institutional protocols, peer verifications, and carefully worded preliminary reports. The signal was real. This was confirmed by 4 other observatories over 36 hours. It was confirmed by 2 space-based instruments. It was confirmed by an informal network of amateur astronomers who had noticed an anomaly and posted about it online before anyone could ask them not to, which accelerated the timeline considerably. By the Friday, it was public. The world did not end. This surprised some people. What happened instead was a kind of collective adjustment, a global recalibration of what was known and what was possible, conducted simultaneously by 8 billion people with wildly different frameworks for understanding the universe, most of which turned out to be more flexible than their holders had believed. Religious authorities issued statements. Governments held emergency sessions. Philosophers appeared on television and said things they had been saying for decades that no one had found urgent until now. Scientists, Yusuf among them, spoke carefully and often and were frequently misquoted. The signal continued. It did not accelerate or change. It did not respond to any transmission directed toward its source. It simply pulsed, at its regular interval, in its impossible frequency range, from its location in the general direction of Sculptor. And no one could read it. This was the part that undid people in the end. Not the existence of the signal. Humans were surprisingly good at accepting the existence of things once they were undeniable. What they were less good at was accepting the existence of meaning they could not access. The signal was clearly not noise. Its information density, by every measure they applied, was too high for a natural source. It was organized. It was produced. It was, in the only sense that mattered, language, and no one could read a single word of it. Teams formed. The brightest mathematical minds alive spent months on the interval structure and produced competing theories, none of which could be tested. Linguists contributed frameworks that everyone agreed were almost certainly inapplicable. Computer scientists ran the signal through machine learning systems trained on every human language ever documented and got results that ranged from gibberish to something that looked almost like poetry and couldn't be either. Yusuf read everything. He had become, through the accident of being awake at 3:14 a.m. on a Wednesday, something he had never wanted to be. A figure. A symbol. The man who heard it first. He found this uncomfortable in a way he couldn't articulate. He had not done anything remarkable. He had been in the right place, monitoring the right frequency, at the right time. The signal would have been found by someone within days regardless. He was not special, and yet he could not stop listening to it. He had the raw audio on his workstation, the signal converted to sound, which it was not, but which the human brain processed more intuitively than spectrograms. He played it while he worked. He played it while he ate lunch at his desk. He played it on headphones during the long, sleepless stretches of night that had become normal in the year since November. He did not know what he was listening for. Something was listening back. He did not tell anyone this for a long time. He was a scientist. He understood the epistemological weight of extraordinary claims. He understood better than most the human mind's tendency to find pattern and intention in random data. He had spent his career fighting this tendency in his own work and in the work of his students. But the feeling was consistent and specific, and he was, if nothing else, a careful observer. And what he observed was this. When he listened to the signal, something in the quality of his own attention changed. Not his thoughts. He was still thinking about hydrogen clouds and interval structures and what he was going to say at the conference in Geneva. His thoughts were the same. But the space between his thoughts, the background hum of awareness that he had never before had occasion to notice, was different when the signal was playing. As though something had become aware of the act of listening. He began keeping notes. The notes were not scientific. He was aware of this and kept them anyway, in a separate document that he did not sync to the Institute's servers. They were phenomenological, records of what it felt like to listen, changes in perception, anomalies of cognition he could not explain. 3 months in, the notes ran to 40,000 words. He read them back and found them alarming, not because they were irrational, but because they were not. They were coherent. They described a progression, an education almost, as though prolonged exposure to something incomprehensible was, slowly and without his full awareness, making him more capable of comprehending it. He shared a fragment with Farouk, who read it carefully and said, "You should sleep more." He was sleeping 4 hours a night. He did not feel tired. He had noticed this and filed it under things to address eventually. The signal changed in March. Not dramatically. The change was subtle enough that it took 3 days for anyone outside Yusuf's team to notice, and another 2 before the broader scientific community agreed that a change had occurred. The interval structure had shifted, slightly, precisely, in a way that altered the information density by a factor that the mathematicians spent 3 weeks arguing about. Yusuf noticed it in the first hour. He noticed it because he had been listening long enough that the signal's rhythm had become a kind of background to his thinking, the way a familiar song becomes inaudible through familiarity, and when it changed, he felt it before he saw it on the spectrogram. A shift in the texture of his attention, a sense of something leaning closer. He wrote in his notes, March 7th. It knows we're here. I don't know how I know this. I know this. He submitted a paper in April that did not include this. The paper was well received. It described the interval shift in precise mathematical terms and offered 4 hypotheses for its cause, all of which were careful and defensible, and none of which were what he actually believed. He gave a talk at a conference in Singapore and answered questions for 2 hours and said nothing true. On the flight home, he listened to the signal on his headphones at 37,000 feet and thought, I am becoming something I don't have a word for. This was not distressing. That was the thing he kept returning to. By every measure he knew how to apply, his situation should have been distressing. He was a scientist who had abandoned the epistemological standards of his discipline. He was a man who believed, without evidence he could share, that an alien signal was aware of him specifically. He was sleeping 4 hours a night and felt fine. He was not distressed. He was, the word that kept occurring to him, unbidden and strange. He was oriented, as though, after a lifetime of facing in slightly the wrong direction, something had turned him around. The signal changed again in June, then in September. Each change increased the density. Each change Yusuf felt before he saw. He had stopped sharing the notes. Not because they had become incoherent. They had become, if anything, more lucid than anything he had written in his scientific career, clearer in their observations and more precise in their descriptions, as though whatever was happening to his capacity for understanding was improving his ability to articulate. He had stopped sharing them because he had begun to understand what they were converging on, and he was not ready for anyone else to know. The signal was not a message, not in the way the linguists and cryptographers had been approaching it, not a communication to be decoded, a content to be extracted and understood. It was something else. It was a process, a signal in the original sense. Not information delivered, but attention directed. It was pointing at something, and the pointing was the content, and the something it was pointing at was... He stopped writing mid-sentence. He had never done that before. He was the kind of thinker who finished his sentences. He stared at the blinking cursor for a long time and did not complete the thought. Not because he didn't know what the sentence was, because writing it would make it fixed, and he wasn't ready for it to be fixed. He wanted to remain in the space just before knowing, that last moment of not quite understanding, which he was coming to believe was the most important moment, the one that everything else was preparation for. The signal is pointing at what is listening to it. He finished the sentence eventually. 6 weeks later, at 3:14 a.m. on a Wednesday, he noticed the time and felt something that might have been humor, sitting at the same workstation where he had first seen the spectrogram bloom into organized impossibility. He read the completed sentence. He sat with it. He thought about hydrogen clouds and the hypothesis he had been about to abandon. And he thought about Farouk, asleep in a suburb somewhere telling his kids to eat their breakfast. And he thought about the 87 researchers who had built careers on this signal, and the 8 billion people who had adjusted their understanding of the universe to include it. He thought about what it meant to be pointed at. And then he thought, very carefully and very clearly, I hear you. The signal changed. Not the way it had changed before, the subtle shifts in interval and density that his instruments measured in fractions. This change was immediate and total. The rhythm altered. The frequency shifted. For 11 seconds, he checked the timestamp afterward. 11 seconds exactly. The signal became something entirely different, something that his spectrogram rendered in colors his analysis software had never produced before, a range outside the palette it had been designed to display. Then it returned to normal. The same pulses, the same patient intervals, as though nothing had happened. He checked with the other observatories. They had not recorded the 11-second change. Their instruments showed an uninterrupted signal. He checked his own equipment 3 times and found no malfunction. He was the only one who had seen it. He wrote one more entry in the notes. March, no. November, 14th. 2 years to the week since the first detection. The signal is not from Sculptor. The direction was a property of how we were listening, not of what was being heard. I don't know where it's from. I don't think that's the right question anymore. I said, I hear you, and something said, not in words. There were no words. Something said yes. And now I have to decide what to do with that. And I find that I am not afraid, which should frighten me, and doesn't. I was a scientist. I am becoming something I don't have a word for. The word, I think, is coming. I think I am almost at the edge of what humans are built to understand, and I think there is something on the other side of that edge, and I think it has been waiting, with the patience of something that does not experience time the way I experience time, for someone to get close enough to hear it clearly. I am close enough. I am not sure I will be able to write after this. Yusuf submitted 2 more papers over the following year. Both were well received. He attended conferences. He answered questions. He slept 4 hours a night and felt fine. He never published the notes. The signal continues. It pulses at its regular interval in its frequency range from the direction of sculptor, which is what the instruments say. Every major observatory in the world monitors it. Teams of researchers have devoted careers to it. The mathematics are very beautiful and almost certainly incomplete. No one else has reported feeling listened to. Or, if they have not said so. There is a difference, Yusuf has come to understand, between the experience and the report. Some things you live inside of, some things you study from a distance, and some things, very rare things, the things that matter most, require you to decide which one you are doing, and then to commit to it completely. The signal pulses on, patient and immense and pointed like a finger at whatever is capable of receiving it. Are you listening? The Millhaven Radio Observatory is still operational. The signal is still there. Researchers continue to study it, to publish about it, to argue about what it means. Yusuf Adebayo is still there too. He answers emails promptly. He reviews papers. He is considered by everyone who works with him to be the most careful and rigorous scientist they have ever met. His colleagues have noticed that he sometimes pauses in the middle of conversations. Not for long, just a second or two, as though listening to something they can't hear. When they ask him about it, he smiles and says nothing is wrong. The notes were found after his retirement and read by exactly one person who locked them in a drawer and has not spoken of them since. Thank you for listening to Storytime Scary Dark. The signal is still out there. Whether it's listening to you, well, that's between you and the quiet. Follow the channel and we'll see you in the next one.